Classical art forms are like vast oceans. A dip in its pristine waters, and you will be swimming in it till eternity. It's a work of a lifetime, and for some, many lifetimes. Have you ever watched a beautiful performance and wondered what must be going in to be able to perform at that level of excellence? Clearly, we all know the response is Riyaaz. Do you think the word Riyaaz can be confined to the word practice? To me, it has way more connotations and references. Don't you wish they told you what exactly they do when they say, "Hum Riyaaz karte hain"? Well, these are the questions that intrigued me, and I decided to get some answers. Not to keep them with me, but to share with the world at large the vision of these artists, their secrets. Hence the series
Raaz Riyaaz Ka.
Namaskaram. Our artist featuring in today's episode needs no introduction at all. I almost pinched myself twice when he said yes to Raaz Riyaaz Ka, a performer of international repute who has mastered multiple disciplines and has carved a niche for himself in the world of classical dance. Technique with precision, layered with uninhibited abandon is his signature style. His abhinaya is so sublime it melts your heart. I don't know how many times I have watched his Ka Wawa video and I've wondered how he, the dancer, becomes the dance. And yes, as you may have guessed it right, it's none other than Mavin Khoo. Mavin Anna, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of Raaz Riyaaz Ka.
Prachi, it's absolutely a joy to be with you.
So I have this very reflective sort of a question right in the beginning for you, where when I started this series Raaz Riyaaz Ka, it always started with the sense of curiosity and wanting to know. It was a very, I would say, selfish motive, because I looked at all these amazing artists such as you, and I wondered what is it that they do to reach that point of excellence, what is it that happens in their studio space, and I wanted to just be that little fly on the wall and get a peek into their space. And I always thought it is something like a guarded secret. It is something I felt like, no, why would anyone want to share what they do? But I realized as I went along, and I've kind of interviewed so many artists, and even you for that matter, I've seen you're so generous with your sharings. And I thought the onus is now on us as to what we do with this wisdom. So I just wanted your thoughts on my thoughts.
I mean, I think that's so beautiful what you just shared just now. And perhaps I would like to suggest that instead of considering it as something selfish, actually there's such a beautiful curiosity that in many ways that kind of reflects actually a very honest and infectious love for dance. And I think with many of us, what has carried us through is a madness for dance, which we then really connect and find a resonance when we find someone else who equally seems curious and mad like us. That often kind of triggers this desire to share, because there's a sense of an unspoken understanding, I think, that is so beautiful, and that one immediately wants to ensure that we can tangibly connect in that sense.
And I know that you always call yourself at that brink or that bridge where you're connecting what was past and now the future, and you consider yourself at that
the in-between
the
space.
in-between. You've spoken about that.
I think that's so important, particularly today, isn't it? Because I think we belong in a world now that rightfully presents a lot of discourse in terms of tradition, in terms of history, in terms of process, in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and I think that discourse is very important. But I also think there's a danger in either just dismissing the past in order to just go with what may seem more socially right, or there's a danger in terms of being totally indifferent to the needs of today. And I think I've really, everything is a learning lesson. So I engage with young people all the time. My work predominantly with Akram Khan a lot has to do with working with young dancers. But there does come a time when you feel a sense of duty to a new generation of artists. How do we support and guide them into a particular direction of working that is best going to help them develop a particular sense of intelligence into working with their practice as Indian classical dancers, having a conviction with their form, and then being able to apply that into a rigor and a practice that can sustain them through a journey professionally.
Is for someone to see the work, experience the work, and not see me in it, my craft in it. If you see my craft in it, then you see my ego. If you're going, look at that timing, look at the way he put it together, then you're not in the story. You are observing from the outside.
We are facilitators on stage.
That's the power of collective thought.
That's why it's that thing we're saying, there's nothing wrong. It's all about conviction. And as you said, we both sit very much in this in-between space, which is very important. But that has given us the benefit of really seeing the power and the disadvantage that can exist in both, right? And as much as I have seen, even until quite recently, some quite appalling behavior, some disappointing choices, some slightly arrogant stances, some indifferent positions from the older generation. It's very important that I also am able to identify some of the very beautiful qualities that others of the older generation have embodied and are wanting to pass on. The Malakas, the Ramakas, there's so much grace and empathy and knowledge and desire to share and with the values that they hold. And I think for me, I think it's so important that we try to find this meeting point in terms of transitioning to a new world that will carry and take on beautiful values from tradition.
Absolutely.
And of course dismiss the ones that need to be dismissed.
Absolutely. And I think conversations, I think what is now brewing is there is a direct conversation, which is so important.
Yeah, and I think that has to come from my generation. We have to be the ones to ensure that we understand our responsibility in facilitating conversations, and I think that's important. Facilitating conversations, not being the ones to
not one-sided.
Not one-sided. I think there's a tremendous danger in always assuming that. I always say there's a danger in assuming that people want to hear our thoughts, right? It's not about our thoughts. It's about how can we facilitate thoughts to be discussed. Yeah.
Interesting. So recently I read a story somewhere that a little fish talking to his father, and he says that, "Father, I want to see the ocean, I want to be in the ocean." And the father said to him that, "Son, you are in the ocean." He says, "No, this is not the ocean, this is just water." Which brings me to the point of satiate. So as young dancers today, a lot of them who are watching this very intently and they want to hear your views on this, is that at what point do you decide that, okay, I am content? So there's also a pitfall to that. If you feel, I'm content, does that take away your drive to work? And at the same time, that feeling of discontent just bogs you down because then you're never happy. So how do you negotiate that feeling?
I think you have to trust, which is very difficult. You have to trust in the contentment for the discontentment.
Well, I have to process that. Wait.
I think what I feel very grateful for is that I was nurtured somehow to fall in love with the not knowing. I was nurtured to fall in love with the search. I was taught to fall in love with the flaws, the imperfections. As much as I was taught to understand what was aspirational, I was taught to understand what was to be aimed for. And as particularly classical dancers, it is already enough within our pedagogy that we understand prescriptions, especially aesthetically, of what a perfect line is, or what a embodied position is. So we understand that. That's in a way what we share as a common thread, right? We have an understanding of a particular aesthetic. But what is very beautiful is the individualism that comes through the imperfections that exist within me, within you, within each dancer, and the navigation of that imperfection with the commonality of that perfection is where there is a multiplicity of interpretation.
That is so beautiful what you just said.
It's so much about, many times I feel about us really breaking down really what are we looking for. I've often talked about this. If we really are creating art, right, we keep saying that as dancers what we're artists, then the ability to be open to what we do as artists on stage, being liked and not liked, is important. What I want audiences when they come and watch me is to like what my choices are, or also not like them. They have to be open. I have to be open to both. But what I want all of them to do is to feel something.
This way or that way.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it has to be felt. And I think that takes time to find that confidence, I think.
Or to reach that point where you understand, are able to discern that this is happening and it's okay for this to happen.
Yeah. And one of the things that many times when I'm working with dancers, I try to get them to at least start thinking about is to be confident and convinced in the choice of what they want to do with their art. Do you want to be an artist that creates an experience, or do you want to be an artist who just wants to give a show? Both are fine, right? Do you want your audience to feel, or do you want your audience to be impressed and observe and watch? Because I think when you slowly start to find a conviction in that choice, that has an impact on many levels and layers in terms of how you start to define your process, your riyas,
Yes.
what you are searching for, even in performance, what are you searching for? All those things start to have a sense of clarity and identity.
You've also mentioned once about accepting your shortcomings, and how do you place the word like self-doubt and self-worth? Like, I think a lot of us struggle with that intensely, where you're always undermining, always thinking that, am I that good? Am I really good? So what about, how do you handle those aspects?
It's tough one because I really have such a love for this very intangible quality of vulnerability, because I think when you are vulnerable in a both in a practice space or in a performance space, in a creative space, that's the access point that somehow allows for this very human to human connection to happen. And you can imagine, if you have a theater of four or 500 people or 5,000 people, if you are able to come to a conviction of that vulnerability, what it can do to 5,000 people is quite incredible, right? But it takes many years to come to a space that gives you a technique that understands how to navigate that in a creative space and how to protect that in a personal space out of that creative space. I don't know what the answer is in terms of efficiency. What I can say is that I have trusted a life journey that has had many times has had to struggle with that. And maybe part of that struggle is actually now what has culminated to something beautiful. But I don't know what the answer would be in terms of protecting dancers from that very complex
Or I
journey.
suppose it's a path that you have to go through. It's
Perhaps.
like a grind.
I mean, it's one of those very it's one of those very complex discussions, isn't it? It's like, it's that question: do you have to struggle to make good art, right? And of course, my sensibility would say that in many ways a very complex life that has I very openly talk about it, being a queer Londoner, and exploring everything that queer London provided to me as a young man. You know, I talked about it in Mumbai, you know, so everything from sex, drugs and rock and roll was so a part of my life experience, and that had so much complexity with it in terms of great joy and some very dark spaces, but that has given me something today to say in my art, in my dance. Am I saying that every artist has to go through that? Absolutely not. I wouldn't want every artist to go through that. But if you can kind of find a space where you start to see those dark spaces as life still,
sense.
and having lived, you find a beauty in darkness as well.
And I think that's what creates each individual the way they are, because there
For
is a
sure.
certain life experience that they come with, and
Absolutely.
that's what builds into. So where do you, how does your personal reflect in the performative or the experience of dance? How much do they trickle into each other?
I would say at this stage of where my relationship with my practice is, it's almost completely there. It's autobiographical, really. And that's dangerous as well, because there's a fine line when it's just an indulgent kind of narrative, right? And I think that the responsibility, the riyas, has been through these years in trying to find the technique that will be able to tell my story in order to use my story to facilitate a space for the audiences individually to place their story.
पश्यति दिशि दिशि रहसि भवन्तं पश्यति.
So my story is not the end goal. I'm using my story because that's the only way I know how to be honest, in order to give a space for the audiences to place their stories.
Wow, that's such a beautiful.
But it takes a long time, and it takes many years of failing on stage. Of course, I've gone through phases where my performances potentially must have been incredibly self-indulgent. I'm sure, but I've had to go through all those failures on stage to understand this very complex navigation, this very complex technique of facilitating a space. Because at the end of it, what I love about our form as dancers is that for me, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah, that's the primary role. But do you find yourself bare on stage, or do you find that you still have, do you, like you use the word vulnerable? So when you are on stage, do you find yourself, come read me, I'm bare?
So one of the reasons why one of the reasons why I identify with this concept of being a queer man, I think people many times just assume queerism from a gender perspective, right? Or even from the perspective of sexuality. But for me, queerism is about everything that is in between. So it's kind of this, it's neither that, it may be this. It's ambiguous, right? And everything I think that I play with is about, it's this but it's not also. So even that question you're asking, it is, I am totally bare and I'm not.
Correct. So there's beauty in the ambiguity.
The ambiguity, yeah. There's a shruti in it. The ambiguity is where the harmony lies. The ambiguity is where the alignment comes.
And that leaves space for everyone to enter.
Yeah.
Like if everything is too clear,
absolutely
defined, then where is the space for me to enter? Like you said, find my story.
The key is what you just said now. How do I create that space? And I've always been, when I was young, I used to be fascinated, by when I used to see choreography on Ardhanari, right? And traditionally, we have this naturally a construction where if I'm doing Chambaya Gaur, one side is male, one side is female. Even my tattoos, that's what it is, right? The right is all masculine, the left is all feminine. But what I've always been fascinated by is the line right between. Because the line right between is where they meet, but where they merge, but where also they separate.
Nobody talks about this line.
Yeah. So for me, even if we are doing that Ardhanarishwara Stotram, Shankaracharya's, the beauty of the line actually lies in when it comes to Namah Shivaya cha Namah Shivaya. The phrase always ends with that. Because you talk about the right, you talk about the left, and then you always come back to the central X.
कृतस्मराय विकृतस्मराय नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय.
So Anna, now I come to the main purpose of what this series is all about. Because what I also figure is everything that you're saying is so much food for thought. But I think a lot of us also need very tangible, hands-on tools to work with to begin with. So if I was to break down your Riyaaz as a solo practitioner and also something that you would encourage young students to do, like it's a two-part question. So what is your solo practice or Riyaaz like, and what is it that you would encourage?
So it's a complex question you're asking me.
I know, but whatever you can try.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is for me always that as dancers, I think it's very important that we make a very clear distinction between the concept of Riyaaz as opposed to the concept of rehearsal.
Yes.
I'd really take them as two completely separate entities. For me, Riyaaz is boring, actually. It's where it's grammar, it's repetition, it's very simple, and it's just doing it again and again and again. And Riyaaz is where I have that unrealistic, very boring persistence to try to do it the best I can.
Okay.
Right? So Riyaaz for me, ironically, is a place where I'm always navigating my ego
Okay.
also, right? It is also the only place where I challenge myself now, particularly in terms of trying to discover things that my body does now as an older dancer, which I couldn't do before. And I'm saying it very specifically because usually we talk about things that we can't do anymore, that we used to be able to do before, right? I have had amazing teachers that have taught me to reverse it psychologically. So what I do in Riyaaz is I try to understand my body now and see where the potential is now with things that I could not have done before because I was too young to do it.
Wow. So you look at it like looking at the brighter
Yeah, because I think Riyaaz is so psychological. It's so psychological about how you look towards this concept of perfection, right? Rehearsal is for me about exploring, which means
like your laboratory.
yeah, which means you have to be open constantly to failures.
Yes.
Right? If I'm always experimenting with something, you experiment many things to see what doesn't work,
True.
to find one thing that works. Right?
And then do you stick to it?
No, I stick to it for a period of time with absolutely a sense of that then is going to reveal something unexpected.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So what I'm looking for in rehearsal is an anchor that will give me answers on stage.
Oh.
Because
so it's like planting that seed
yes,
here and then
yes,
kind of letting it manifest.
or a structure that is going to allow me to find answers. Because of course, Prachi, you know, I work so much in Manodharmam. You know, in Bharata Natyam, really, I have done very little group. I've not actually done any group work or thematic work. It's interesting that my whole history as a Bharata Natyam dancer, which is now more than 30 years performing, has only been through Margam.
Yes. I'm coming to that a
Yeah.
little later. But since we are there, why
Sure.
don't you talk about
So it has only been through Margam, right? So for me, this concept of Manodharma has been something that has been over now 15 years, been deepening more and more and more and more. And so my process is so much with the musicians is so much about for that particular Margam, which differs, you know, it's not a system that fits for all Margams.
Absolutely.
It's about defining what is the structure that we can collaboratively find together that is going to give us the space for ideas to fly in the moment.
And that is the Manodharma what you talk about, like what happens on that day
Yes,
on stage.
yes, yes.
Kind of work collectively
Absolutely.
towards that.
And the key for me is two elements, which is sahitya, of course, and really I totally surrendered to the structural specificity of raga.
I know, I remember in Mumbai when you had that workshop, the way you indulged in that one Nija Gadasa.
Right.
I remember in that entire 2-hour session, like that was the biggest takeaway, that you made us sing. So I
Yes.
understand the importance that you give to music. I mean, that goes without saying. If you want to talk something about that, I'd be happy to.
I think it comes a lot, this absolute, what music offers comes from a very unconscious subliminal passing on that was given to me, that I have started to realize that my training was really actually as a musician, but with my body as an instrument. Because of who my guru was, because of the time that I went to him where he was in his age, right? As a non-dancing guru at that point, but a singer of that level of sophistication.
And a Nattuvanar.
And a Nattuvanar.
That's such a rare
Absolutely.
combination.
And the coming together of me and him, our temperaments together at that specific moment in both our lives, where perhaps I had also something that enabled him to really delve into his musicality with a temperament that understood that. You see? So, music has become really the key source of my work. Absolutely. And it's interesting that also the musicians that I work with, all the singers that I've worked with since Sir passed on, and he doesn't, obviously since then I had to work with other singers, have all been really predominantly kacheri singers as opposed to dance musicians. And that has always forced me to understand that I have a responsibility to engage with them from a musical perspective.
Especially your chemistry with O.S. Arjun Anna. I mean, it's amazing how you also. I want to know from you at this point, what is the conversation you have with him to kind of, so that you all both add to each other and meet at a meeting point? Like, what are your conversations like?
It's a long relationship.
When you're working on a piece or
Yeah,
something.
it's a long relationship we've had now. So the conversation has evolved a lot. But I would say, and I always say this to dancers, that they must never fear this element of proving yourself. Right? I think there are certain things that by nature I had. Sometimes I do think that there are certain embodied values that are very cultural. There's something that's quite Chinese, I would say, about this thing of proving yourself, right? And I think I've always had this as a child. And so when Arun and I first came together, I remember our first rehearsal, the minute he started singing, I knew that I had to prove myself to him that I could musically match him.
Okay.
Because I realized that if I didn't do that, he would of course sing, but he would never go to the threshold of his artistry.
Like he would hold back.
For sure, right? So the first thing in the rehearsal I realized was, okay, I cannot tell this artist the number of times he needs to sing a line.
Okay.
Right? Which meant I let him just go. And I just continued. I just continued however many times he went, or I would just make sure I was open enough to understand where he was going in terms of a sangadi or whatever nuance that he was going. So that trust with each other, that he also trusted that musically I would match him, was very important for us then to have a conversation.
Yeah. So first level was that.
For me.
That little trust
Yes,
building.
the trust building was crucial. Now it's come to a space where I think what we both look at when we have conversations, even now, last month he sang for me, is many times we both have a capacity to look at the structure, and this is where satiate comes in, and then identify a micro point in a line where a particular word has potential that is sometimes even beyond that particular composition. So this with Arun, I have done, for example, a Varnam, Sakhi Ananda Bhairavi Varnam, and there's a particular line in that second line of the Pallavi where it just seemed right somehow that the Ananda Bhairavi could shift into Neelambari for Madhava Mama Vatukam. So we have these trigger points that we immediately understand with each other. Similarly, I remember when we were performing in London, the most unusual combination of resources. I did a beautiful Kalyani Varnam that in the Anupallavi line, somehow we managed to find through the Sahitya a dramaturgical poetic transition that very organically led to Nidirayal Swapinattu in Pantuvarali. And then it came back to the Kalyani Varnam, and then somehow after the Anupallavi line had finished, it landed to Aaj Janaki is in the Nakaro. So I think what we both look at is the dramaturgical arc of when we start that Varnam, where the Nayika's emotion is going to go. And we allow ourselves the liberty to play with different compositions because we both feel secure enough in our understanding and grip of the classicism and the rules set of coming in and out and going into,
And not letting the classicism bind you, rather liberate you.
I mean, it's a beautiful kind of what you just said now. I think it's a beautiful space to be when one looks at, I don't look at classicism at all as binding.
Exactly, because this itself explains, because one would never imagine in a Varnam you could even go into another composition and come back.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost unheard of.
I mean, I've always used the analogy of when we talk about the idea of a frame, right? Many times with classical dance, we talk about the frame. And many times I'll ask dancers, but what is the frame made from? Right? So for me, the frame is not made from wood, it's not made from steel, it's not made from brass, it's made from plasticine. So you can completely still keep the external structure of the frame, but it has the possibility to have so much mobility.
Absolutely.
And what sits inside the frame remains the same.
And the frame itself is there, so
Yes.
it's not like you're ever
Absolutely.
not in the frame.
Absolutely. But what's very beautiful is if you think of an image in a frame with a very pliable actual frame, when you shift it, the image inside itself will start to shift, morph, and then come back.
True.
So the content has the possibility to morph, which I love.
That's such an interesting visual itself, the minute you visualize that frame.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it carries in so many ways. It even, I often talked about this, it even because it's, you know, it's something that is so present in me, the maturing of my body as I'm getting older, right? Even your muscles as you get older shift the tension by which you pull a frame. So that same way I might pull something will shift from the age of 20 and how I do it when I'm 40.
True.
Which means the content inside will keep shifting, even if it's exactly pulled in exactly the same way.
Absolutely.
So that is what fascinates me.
So you spoke about childhood, so I want to just go back and refresh a little bit of what your day was like with Lakshman sir. Like, what was your routine like?
Well, I think the first
We
thing...
want to fall down in shock after hearing that.
No, I think the first thing to say with those kinds of gurus was there was a tremendous rigor in non-specificity,
Okay.
right? So if I was to generalize, I will say my day would start at 5 in the morning, right? It's like that 5 till 8 or 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., right?
Oh my God.
Or I'll tell you about other stories. But that didn't mean you were dancing all the time.
True. There's so much more happening via osmosis.
You were with him. I was
Yeah.
with him all the time.
Correct.
That's my point, right? But the dancing could last from 5 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. Let's say that's a more conventional day. Yeah, 5 to 2, and then he used to sleep, have his lunch and sleep, and then you start again from 4, and then, you know, go on until 8 or something, and then he might have a program which I would go with him for, and he was an insomniac. So he was an insomniac, so he could never sleep at night. So I've had many instances that I've learned items, like I've learned Tirmanam that he has choreographed on me that has happened at midnight, 1 o'clock,
Because
2 o'clock in the
suddenly it
morning.
came to him and he wanted to just kind of give it to you at that
Yes,
point.
and I had the great pleasure, the great privilege of being, two things that were to my benefit in that context, was that I was young, I was a young boy, and I was a boy, which meant my actual time with him was constant, right? As I said recently in a lecture demonstration, I think we both had a very romanticized need that we found in each other. I was so young that I think on reflection there was a part of me that reminded him of when he first went to Kalakshetra, because he was a small boy as well, and many times he would talk about the moments he had with Mysore Vasudevacharya walking down the beach, and Tiger Vadacharya, and he would many times
legends.
share with me him as a young boy,
Wow.
more than a young man. That's interesting. I had a whole image of the movie Shankarabharanam, of a guru and a young boy, and and I think in many ways we actually very beautifully cultivated those romantic images for each other, very much so. So it was very, I don't think, I many times I say I weep for the fact that I don't think today a young child will be able to experience that anymore, just because the world has changed.
It was a rare kind of a
Yeah,
living
completely. It was a magical, surreal fairyland,
and
right?
it's like you've dug this deep well from which you're drawing even today.
You know, I think there's something I often say in your 20s, and for me, even up to my 30s, where you spend so much of it trying to detach yourself and become independent of your history. But it still sits with you if it's embodied enough. And if you allow it to still sit with you, something happens in your 40s where you then want to reattach yourself to it.
Like you kind of want to go back to it, or
You want, no, I wouldn't say go back to it, where you understand the power of its existence in you today for you to actually carry on.
like it's fortified. It's some
Yeah,
sort of a
and it's
foundation.
actually what is going to allow you to move on. You know, so instead of thinking that you need to release it to move on, you actually realize, no, actually I need to hold it so tightly, that's the only way I can move on.
Beautiful.
And I think that's very much the space I'm in now, and actually that is giving me all kinds of incredible answers. That of course will shift as well. I'm very open to that, but it's thrilling to be in a space where I can still feel like a boy in relation to my dance. I'm still so excited by it. I still am so curious about it. I still, I was saying to someone that I still pack my bag the day before with my dance clothes of what I'm going to wear. And that is a beautiful space to be, to allow yourself to be a child with it.
When one uses the word secret, one feels it's something that should not be shared. It should be guarded. But why should knowledge such as this be guarded and not shared? If shared, it will only result in making better and more dedicated artists, and that, in turn, will only benefit the art. We are fortunate to have such artists in the series Raaz Riyaaz Ka, who are breaking the notion of their Riyaaz being a Raaz.
राज रियाज का